All right, so get this. Shanghai, 8,000 cafes.
8,000.
Yeah, more cafes than some cities have pigeons.
Seriously.
Seriously.
Mm.
And it's not just the number, it's the speed. This coffee scene has exploded.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking a projected $13 billion market increase by 2024.
Wow. That's mind-boggling.
Right.
And that rapid growth, that's what makes this whole, deep dive so compelling. We're not just talking about a caffeine fix. This boom,
Yeah.
this speaks to like larger economic trends, cultural shifts, big questions about sustainability.
Totally. So we've got a stack of articles,
Yeah.
a lively comment section, all about this coffee explosion.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Right. Okay, so our main source, it paints this picture of independent cafes like popping up on every corner,
Yeah.
each one trying to be unique, offer an experience, a story, a vibe. And then you've got the big chains, too. Can they all survive?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, some experts are predicting that, get this, 30% of these new cafes, they might have to close within the next year.
That's a lot.
It is. It's a classic case of, a market in flux. You've got this huge desire for authenticity, unique experiences, especially with younger generations, and that's fueled this expansion. But as the article points out, that alone doesn't mean success. There's this whole other layer of economic realities.
Right, like rent, competition.
Exactly. High overheads, fierce competition, and the constant challenge. How do you stand out in a crowded market?
Or it's not enough to just have, like, a cool logo and some fancy latte art.
Not anymore. Consumers, especially in Shanghai, they're savvy. They can get a decent cup of coffee practically anywhere.
So then what? What's the key?
It's about the experience, crafting something special, a sense of community maybe, something that resonates.
Which is where this comment section gets really interesting, right? It's like we get to hear from the people actually living it, cafe owners, coffee enthusiasts. There's even someone comparing the Shanghai coffee scene to China's space program.
I saw that. It's amazing. That's what I love about these deep dives. We go beyond the headlines, we hear from everyone, and that space program comparison, actually, it's kind of insightful.
Okay, now I gotta know, what's the connection? Space program, coffee.
So this commenter, they drew a parallel. The ambition, the drive behind China's space program, they're saying it's similar to what's happening in the Shanghai coffee scene.
Interesting.
Right. Both are about pushing boundaries, taking risks, this desire to be at the forefront, be innovative. It suggests that these entrepreneurs, they're not just in it for profit, they have a vision.
Okay, so we've got this entrepreneurial spirit, but is it sustainable? The articles, even some commenters, pointed out some potential problems, right?
Definitely. And that's where the discussion gets really real. We have to talk about economic realities, responsible business practices. We have comments from, like, Cassidy, who's clearly into this whole coffee culture, but they offer some very practical advice. Cassidy stresses a unique brand identity, exceptional customer service, really understanding your market, like really understanding it. It's not just about getting people in the door, though. It's about doing it sustainably, financially, ethically, all of it. And that's where things get, well, complicated. We have to talk about data privacy.
Right. The article mentioned regulators are starting to pay attention to how some of these businesses are using customer data.
Exactly. It's a good reminder, even in this, like, gold rush of coffee, you got to play by the rules. Responsible business practices matter. And it's not just the big guys, the chains. Those smaller cafes, they need to be mindful too.
So a reality check for anyone caught up in all the excitement. Take a step back, see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And speaking of the bigger picture, one commenter, Zoe, they brought up a really interesting point about the impact on the city itself.
Oh, how so?
Well, they were arguing that all these cafes, chains, and the indie ones, they're actually contributing to a more, dynamic, lively urban environment.
So it's not just about the coffee. It's like these cafes are spaces, right? For connection, for creativity, maybe even just a break from the chaos.
That's it. Zoe was saying these cafes, especially the unique ones, they add to the culture, the diversity of the city. It becomes part of Shanghai's identity.
I love that. It's more than a caffeine fix. It's about the whole experience, the community, how these places shape the city. But then we have, let's see, Gage jumps in with a different angle. They want us to consider the system itself.
Yes. Gage brings up such an important point. Encouraging entrepreneurship is great, but is it enough? For this coffee culture to really work long-term, you need a support system.
Okay, so what kind of support are we talking? Like affordable rents,
Yeah.
fair regulations, that sort of thing?
Exactly. It's got to be an environment where small businesses, those cafes trying to be different, they've got a real shot, not just to survive, but to thrive. Because if the system only works for the big chains, you lose that innovation, that unique energy that makes Shanghai's coffee scene so interesting in the first place.
Right. It's like a rising tide lifts all boats. It can't just be a few cafes doing well. The whole thing has to be healthy.
100%. And that's actually where the conversation takes another turn. We have Paige, who comes in with this very sharp, very finance-focused perspective, like really challenges the rosy picture of this booming market.
Yeah, Page did not hold back, called the article incredibly naive about the financial realities. What were some of their concerns?
So Page brought up this idea of crushing debt, suggesting some of these places they're operating on tiny margins or even going into debt just to keep the lights on.
Oh, wow.
And then they question the pricing models. Like, can you keep prices super low, especially if everyone's competing to have the cheapest latte? They weren't sure it was sustainable.
A little reality check from someone who knows the numbers?
Yeah.
I bet that got people talking.
Oh, for sure. Elliot jumps in, agrees with Page, and then, this is interesting, draws a parallel to the UK housing market.
The UK housing market. Okay, now I'm really curious. What's the connection?
So Elliot's point was, it's like how in the UK you've got all these first-time home buyers getting offered these mortgages that long-term they might not be able to afford.
Risky loans.
Exactly. And they were saying it's similar with these new cafe owners. Maybe they're entering the market with, I don't know, unrealistic expectations, business models that aren't built to last.
So they're both seeing this potential bubble, like all this excitement now, but what happens if things crash down later?
Yes. And look, they both said the cultural value, the energy these independent cafes bring, it's great, but they're urging caution. Like, take a hard look at the numbers. Is this rapid growth really sustainable?
It's kind of wild, right? How a simple cup of coffee turns into this whole big conversation. Optimism, caution, wanting something real, but also, like, responsible.
That's the beauty of these deep dives, though. We're not just, like, skimming the surface. We're
Yeah.
getting into it. The good, the bad, the complicated.
So where does that leave us? Someone's listening to this thinking, okay, should I even try that new cold brew place down the street?
Well, I'm not going to say don't try the cold brew. But yeah, there's a lot to think about. Maybe instead of one big takeaway, it's more like some questions to ask yourself. Like, what's really behind all this growth? Is it just people wanting coffee, or is there something bigger? Social trends changing, even like government stuff?
And we can't forget about that word, sustainable. Can it last? Page and Elliot definitely got us thinking about those risky business models, those potential bubbles.
Right. Got to look past the excitement, ask the tough questions. Can Shanghai really handle 8,000 plus cafes forever? What about those independent places? Can they make it when the big chains have so much power? And how do we make sure this whole unique coffee experience thing doesn't mean businesses cutting corners or being unfair?
It's not just about the coffee itself, it's the whole system around it.
Exactly. That's why this deep dive has been so fascinating. We went from Shanghai streets to what? Data privacy, entrepreneurs to financial experts, a lot to unpack.
Definitely a lot to think about. So for everyone listening, here's something to chew on. If you were opening a cafe in Shanghai, what would be your thing? What would make you stand out? How would you make it work? Not just for you, but for the whole scene.
That's what it's all about. It's not just the information, it's what you do with it, the connections you make, thinking differently about something we all do. Drink coffee.
Perfectly said.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those coffee conversations going.